Welcome to Superhumanizer Podcast, where we promote empathy and understanding in polarizing viewpoints through stories told by people living them. Hello, everyone. I have Mara Kronenfeld here with me today, who is the Executive Director of the United Nations Relief Works Agency USA, otherwise known as UNRWA USA, which is grounded in a mission to help Palestinian refugees achieve their full potential in human development under the difficult circumstances in which they live, consistent with internationally agreed goals and standards. Mara has more than 20 years of experience in international development and community building with a beautiful, strong emphasis on youth. She is a Stanford graduate and Fulbright scholar. I found Mara after the events of October 7 when she appeared on major news channels and podcasts. I was truly amazed by her dedication and deep connection to the region. She even speaks Arabic. She spoke about her friends in Gaza and advocated so heartfully for their safety and peace. She gave us a human insight into life in Gaza and the difficulties of the current war on people and the UNRWA's mission. She truly exemplified being a superhumanizer. It's such an honor to spend some time with you today, Mara. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. So before we get into our discussion today, which I'm sure is going to be deep and difficult on some level, I'd like to play a little game with you that I play with all my guests called What Brings You Joy? Would you play it with me?
Sure.
Okay, great. So I'm going to begin. What brings you joy, Mara?
My family brings me joy.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your family?
Yeah, I have my husband and our two kids, twins, a boy and a girl, Zaid and Nadia. They all are the center of my life, and they're funny and kind, and we get into some interesting conversations, and they give very good hugs.
Oh, beautiful. I love that. And they have Arabic names. Amazing. Thank you. What brings you joy?
What brings me joy is leading a beautiful team that I work with, eight individuals. We're a small team that kind of hits above our weight in terms of what we're able to do. And each of my team members are wonderful, committed people who do what they do as I do, as a labor of love. And our passion really unites us.
I know one of your team members is also called Hani.
Yes.
Endearing. A small but mighty team, really changing the world. Thank you. What brings you joy?
What brings me joy is really leading with my heart. I think that's joy, and that's also hard sometimes. And it's something, frankly, I can't not do, even if I tried. But when you're able to lead with your heart, and when you connect with people who really see your passion and feel what you're feeling, you have the potential to transform them and even help them understand the world in a new way. And to see that happen, and it's happened in the last couple of months, has given me joy.
Beautiful. You are really such a heartful human being. So I loved hearing you say that. Thank you. So that was 1 minute. We're going to switch roles now, and you're going to do that for me. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, Hani, what brings you joy?
Being here with you and learning from all your awesome experience. Really, it brought me joy when you accepted, and it's bringing me joy being here with you. And I'm so excited to learn about all your experience and everything you've been doing.
Thank you, Hani. What else brings you joy?
My community, I have a really strong and beautiful network of friends, especially in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and one friend in particular who is Jewish. And we kind of avoided talking about anything related to that region until recently. And we finally had that conversation. I was so worried that I would lose that friend. But, just like you said, it was heartful, it was compassionate, and it brought me so much joy that we connected at a deeper level. And, I'm an advocate for her and she's an advocate for me. And that's been so beautiful.
That's wonderful. Wonderful to hear. Not the first time I've heard that. That's wonderful. Thank you, Hani. What brings you joy?
This is going to sound stupid, but tres leches cake.
I understand. Not doing. Keep going. Yes. I love tres leches.
Yummy, especially store-bought tres leches. Like I love fancy things, but that cake from Albertsons it just brings me so much joy.
You know that I should have told you that Mexican food is the other thing that brings me joy.
Oh, amazing!
Yeah. We're talking food.
Me too. Maybe one day we'll have some nachos and guac. Inshallah. Thank you. So that was 2 minutes. It was really such a joy getting to know you. I love playing that game with my guests because we get to know so much about each other in 2 minutes. So thank you for playing that game with me.
Pleasure.
So now we're going to dive in I'm going to start by asking you some questions about you. I'd really love to get to know you more. So tell us about you, where you're from, and your background.
Great. I first I'm here as executive director of UNRWA USA, and we are the U.S. national chapter of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. And I should just start by saying we're actually legally and technically a separate entity. We're not part of the United Nations exactly, but we raise awareness about the plight of Palestinian refugees and all the important humanitarian services that UNRWA provides for these refugees, especially at a time of a great humanitarian tragedy like those in Gaza and the West Bank, frankly, are facing these last couple of months. And we raise funds to support those services. And I've been in this position for almost 4 years, and this work is really a labor of love. It follows really, I think that 20 years is probably now, I should change my bio. It's probably turned into some 30 years by now, but of professional work and in involving kind of building bridges between the United States and the Middle East and North Africa, and particularly because I had my own kind of transformational experience traveling to the region, let's say to Egypt the first time in 1996. And despite coming from a family that had traveled, my father's an anthropologist and he had done his field work in Ghana, and we had traveled when I was young, I was still amazed about my own misperception of, frankly, of Egypt, of the broader region, and how different it was than what I thought it would be like. And what I thought it would be like was probably somewhat based on television and media and some very limited caricatures, even though I thought I was pretty educated and well-read. And that led me to continue to travel to the region and work in the region. And then really, of course, another transformative experience was having a Fulbright in Syria, where I lived for 2 years from 2001 to 2003, and just meeting so many good friends there. And I was studying Arabic at the French Institute. But also, I think the reason why it was such a formative experience is my closest friends were Palestinian refugees living in Yarmouk camp. And not only are they wonderful people, I'm staying in contact with them through Facebook and I'm hoping to visit them. Many of them moved to Europe, but one family in particular, the Shahinat, if you're listening, we called them the Shahinat because there were 4 girls and a boy, but we knew the girls so more closely. Their last name was Shaheen, and we called them the Shahinat.
Nice.
So they're friends, particularly Busaina, to this day. And they also happen to know every foreigner in town. And so we'd have some fun parties, too, along the way. It wasn't all study. It was good food and dancing and other things. And so that experience was so profound. And then I had a chance after that working in international development and really leading up the organization I worked at previously, International Youth Foundation, leading up their work in the Middle East and North Africa. From the U.S., I got to go back and forth to the region, all the way from the broader region, let's say all the way from Morocco in North Africa to Oman in the Arabian Gulf, and then had the opportunity to visit Palestine, to visit Ramallah for the first time. And then in this job, I had the chance to go to Jerusalem, Ramallah, and then to Gaza. And I'll certainly share some of my observations later. But I think my family, we happen to be Jewish American, and I probably grew up with some of the same mythology that I know some Jews, not all, of course, in America grew up with, about certain ideas about the role of Israel in history. And I, even as a young person, my dad taught me to question authority, and I always say he reaped the benefits of that himself. I was a little bit argumentative with him. That combined with the fact that my grandfather had escaped Nazi Germany and his whole sister's family was killed, and he was a person who just, even coming from that horrific background, didn't judge people by their religion or where they were from. I remember my grandmother, who was still traumatized, of course, by the Holocaust, saw Germans dancing in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down, and my grandmother in her pain said, "They're all Nazis." And my grandfather said, "That is not true." And so it was my grandfather always had this ability to think beyond kind of a simplistic understanding of people, judging them by where they happen to be born or what they happen to believe. And that had a hugely profound effect on me, which really, frankly, led me to the Palestinian cause. And it's been in my heart ever since, only reinforced by the beautiful relationships I've had with people across all my travels, but particularly my travels in Palestine and with Palestinians. And then I happened to marry a Moroccan gentleman and all that, and have nos kids, as we say.
Nos, amazing.
Half American, half Moroccan, and then get to live, we're living in the US, but we get to go to Morocco when we can and spend time with my husband's beautiful family. Something that's always motivated me is seeing still, and I'm sure you've experienced this, Hani, still seeing some representations of different parts of the world in ways that don't reflect the reality that you or I have lived. And I think one of those things actually I should comment on, really coming back to the beginning of this podcast, is the sheer joy I witnessed and felt in the region. And it's not to say everything's, of course, everywhere there's pain and sorrow and difficulties, and there's bad people and good people everywhere. But the laughter, the dancing, the joy in cooking, the joy in food, the joy in music, the joy in family and togetherness, the hospitality I experienced as an American, as a Jewish person in Syria, walking down the street, people, every stranger, come into our house, let me take care of you. Why are you alone? Are you sick? If you're alone, something must be wrong. No, I'm fine. But I'd go into people's houses and they took care of me. And that connection to community is something so profound. And I think for someone like me, I miss it sometimes in the US, although thankfully I found community here in my later years. But that community is beautiful in the region.
Beautiful. Wow. I am not surprised at all that you were also raised by profound, heartful people. It really so beautiful to see you as a descendant of, Holocaust survivors and the atrocity of everything that happened in Germany, now, full circle coming to help others that are going through persecution. And it's really I am so touched hearing you tell us about your family and the parallels between community as a Jewish person and community as an Arab person. That was also my experience, to learn about Jewish culture and see how similar we are.
Yes.
And, quick question, did you ever feel like when you told people in the Arab world that you're Jewish, how was that received?
Yeah, so I had a lot of interesting experience around that. I think mostly the truth is that where my politics were, kind of how I spoke about what was going on, people knew me. And then I would, usually people didn't ask what your religion is anyway, but if we happen to get in a conversation, I would say, and they'd ask us, I'm Jewish. And the response was across the board, why didn't you tell me earlier? Why are you so nervous? And so that was the response I remember from Busaina, who I mentioned, who just said she was almost upset with me that I thought I couldn't tell her, earlier. And I don't know if it wasn't that I didn't tell her, it just didn't come up. And the experience has been wonderful. And I think actually in some settings in Lebanon, people somehow we ended up talking about these issues. And sometimes it was this beautiful shock of just some people I met in Lebanon and never had the opportunity to meet a Jewish people. So they were just profoundly moved that I was in their house with them and that they frankly got to meet someone who they thought they might not meet in their lifetime. So the experiences have been profound and positive. And I mean, that's not to say there's not discrimination there, not to say there's not discrimination against Arabs and Muslims and other minorities here. Of course, I don't mean to paint a picture that it's all perfect, but my experience has been profound and profoundly positive. And that's, in the end, we all want to see each other as human and be seen as a human being first and foremost.
Thank you for saying that. And that's exactly what this podcast, Superhumanizing, is about. And hate always exists, but I love, tying it back to what you said earlier, leading with your heart, and that's met. Wherever you go, no matter who you are, if you lead with your heart, you're going to meet people that also lead with their heart, and that can cut across so much differences. And hopefully, that will be the way forward for everybody in that region and here and beyond. So how did you come into your role as executive director of UNRWA USA?
Yeah. So when I was in Syria for those 2 years between 2001 and 2003, I had the opportunity to volunteer with actually an English language club that was run by UNRWA in Syria, and got to know actually the head of UNRWA in Syria at the time, a gentleman named Lex Takenberg, who I'm friends with and connected with to this day. And I got to at first I was just volunteering at this English language club, kind of talking in English with a bunch of Palestinian students, refugees in the vocational training center there in Maadi. And, oh no, sorry, I think that's the name of the area. I just maybe conflating it with Egypt. But and then I was just loved being with the students, and it was almost what you described with your friend in San Francisco, that it was a kind of ended up being, because we're speaking English and it's opportunity to discuss things. It was like a moment of sharing each other's culture and also asking some tough questions. So I had again, because of the way I was raised, this kind of open environment. Okay, let's have some conversation. Let's have some real conversations, not just our favorite food and our color and, things you might start in basic.
Let's go deeper.
Let's go deeper. And so the students started to feel comfortable, and they said, we understand, Miss Mara, that in the U.S., the kids, it's very commonplace for kids to divorce their parents. And so I said, wow, it's interesting. Yes, but yes, kids can be much more independent in the U.S. than other settings, but I haven't heard of too many cases where they divorce their parents. But that was wonderful to be able to, and we laughed but really for them to ask some of these questions, and for me to say honestly, yeah, it's a different relationship. To generalize, but kids and parents love each other, and then in turn, for me to be able to talk to them and hear their views about where they live, about their family life, it was just such a pleasure for me. So that really kind of opened my eyes to UNRWA and the programs that UNRWA runs. And then, like I said, in my role in international development, I was back and forth. I was after to the Middle East and North Africa, to Palestine, and got to go, like I said, to Ramallah, to the West Bank, to Jerusalem. And also in that time period, I was on the board of Interfaith Peace Builders, which is now called Eyewitness Palestine. And that organization brings Americans of diverse religious backgrounds to Israel and Palestine to see the conflict, the occupation firsthand, and to understand and learn from actors discussing the occupation and looking for a long-lasting and just and durable peace. And that experience, I was on the board for 3 or 4 years. I got to meet so many Americans whose eyes were opened by visiting the region. And so all of that, and the fact that the Palestinian cause has been deep in my heart, when I saw this opportunity, it was, in a sense, a no-brainer. And I will say that that's what my family, I consulted my husband and my dad and mom and my brother, and they all said, of course you're going to do this. And I think the other thing that appealed to me, in addition to completely leading with my heart and my passion, was a little bit of the mother hen nature of kind of taking a team, and this idea of building this team, and of having trust in each other, and of working together toward common goals, and frankly, I'd had some experience in the private sector of trying to be efficient and do this well and not overburden ourselves. These are challenges that I was excited to take on.
Wow, what a journey. Oh my goodness. I'm sure it was like a very, I guess, challenging decision to make, because you never know, are you going to be safe when you do this job? How are people going to perceive you? You're a Jewish person, are you going to be labeled as, anti-Semitic or anything like that? And I love that to your family, it was like a yes, like an instant yes. And I'm so grateful that for you, it was an instant yes, because the work you've been doing, not just with UNRWA, but I'm also aware of Eyewitness Palestine, and I'm admiring that you were on the board of that. It's more profound work that led to more profound work. So beautiful. Thank you so much for really taking this role and pouring your heart into it. So can you tell us a little bit about the activities of UNRWA before October 7? What was that like?
UNRWA is working in 5 settings, 5 field sites, they call, where Palestinian refugees are. Those are in Gaza. As we know, about 1.7 million Palestinian refugees are in Gaza. They're in the West Bank in East Jerusalem. And then UNRWA works also in Lebanon, Jordan, and in Syria. And UNRWA was mandated by the United Nations to provide humanitarian assistance to this population. And every year this mandate is renewed by countries who are voting as part of the United Nations. And it was really came about in 1949 by UN mandate to address the needs of the 700,000 refugees who are refugee as a result of the creation of the State of Israel. And a little bit of a fact, strange thing is that UNRWA uses this weird adjective, Palestine refugees, if you've heard this, instead of Palestinian. And the idea was that it was UNRWA was meant to serve any refugee in 1949 who was refugeed as a result of the 1948 creation of Israel, whether they were Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. So it was meant not necessarily Palestinian in terms of nationality, but anyone who was in the land of Palestine could be served. Again, in practice, it referred to Palestinians who were refugeed, and primarily, of course, Muslims and Christians. And because there hasn't been a just and durable solution to the plight of Palestine refugees, UNRWA continues to serve this population. And I always say, just as a part of UNRWA USA, that if you know the term planned obsolescence, that you build, maybe in manufacturing, you build something which you know is gonna be defunct, not work after a while, so that you can market a new product later on. So maybe this is some capitalist dream, but we hope UNRWA will be defunct sometime, because we want to work ourselves out of business, because that would mean there's a just and durable solution for the plight of Palestine refugees. And so sometimes when people critique the assistance provided to this population, I say, well, by all means, I don't think Palestinians want to rely on this aid. I don't think it's comfortable for anybody. But until there's a just and durable solution, the services of UNRWA, the actual UN agency, are absolutely necessary. And so UNRWA across these 5 field sites provides education, mostly education up through about 8th grade. And UNRWA schools are known to be some of the best schools in the region. And I can share some statistics around that later. And so there are about 700,000 students up until October 7th who were in UNRWA schools across these 5 field sites. And then UNRWA also provides food and or cash assistance for those who are not able to make a living. And those beneficiaries are primarily in Lebanon and in Gaza. Lebanon, because there's some structural discrimination in the laws which say that Palestine refugees cannot work in certain sectors. And so they're forced into informal labor or very low paying labor. And then in Gaza, of course, with the 16-year blockade of air, land, and sea, Gaza, and this is, of course, pre-October 7th, where it's just gotten worse since then, but has been unable to develop very much of its own economy, because it's not in control of the goods that go in, the goods or the people that go in or out of the Gaza Strip. So UNRWA in Gaza has provided food assistance to some 1.2 million people out of the 1.6 million refugees who are in Gaza. And a similar population, actually 4/5 of the population, 80% of the population is at or near poverty in Gaza. So the needs have been huge, and they're only 1,000 times greater since October 7th. And so in addition to food and cash assistance and education, UNRWA runs health clinics. And I should be clear that these are usually primary and secondary health needs. They're not generally tertiary needs or hospitals or surgeries. And so UNRWA does not run a system of hospitals. And I've seen there's always interesting things on the internet these days. There's something about Al Shifa Hospital being an UNRWA hospital and all sorts of, it's not. UNRWA does not run hospitals. The only hospital that I'm aware of that UNRWA runs happens to be in Qiddiya in the West Bank. I mean, I visited that hospital, but UNRWA as a rule does not run hospitals. And then UNRWA provides for, unfortunately, all too often, needs for rebuilding after conflict, particularly in Gaza and, of course, in the West Bank, of rebuilding shelters for those whose shelters have been destroyed. And in Gaza, this is, depending on how you count, something like the 7th military incursion in 16 years. And so that rebuilding process happens again and again, unfortunately. And so let's see, I said food, health, shelter, and then protection services for those who need protection, orphans, for example, programs against gender-based violence, and then programs to support those who've been unfortunately displaced or dispossessed from their houses, like in East Jerusalem. So those are the primary roles that UNRWA plays. There's other more specific programs, but that generally gives you a sense.
Wow. I mean, I knew a little bit about UNRWA, but that has really like expanded my understanding. Such an important mission. I mean, if UNRWA wasn't doing it, who else would do it and how
Yeah.
would they do it? It's really so fascinating. I will share with you that my grandmother was a Palestinian refugee. I'm Lebanese by origin. And my father actually he was educated in the UNRWA school system, and he lived in poverty. And through the UNRWA school system, he was able to take himself out of poverty. And so I never experienced poverty, thanks to programs like the ones you mentioned and the work you've been doing. And, here I am today as a doctor in the US, and that none of that would have been possible without the work that the UNRWA is doing. So I have a deep, profound gratitude for you in that work. Thank you so much for doing that and for explaining all that to us. It's really I want to drill to our audience how important the mission of the UNRWA is and how nobody else could have really stepped in and done that if it wasn't for these international actors and heartfelt people like you that are pouring into the mission. So what has it been like after October 7th?
Yeah, and I'll tell you that, and just before I do, and it will lead into that. UNRWA has actually 30,000 people. Also, don't know it's one of the only UN agencies that's an operational organization, implementing organization. So unlike UNHCR or World Food Program or UNICEF, it has 30,000 people employed who are on the ground implementing the education and health and protection and shelter programs. And actually, the vast, vast majority of those people who work at UNRWA are Palestinian refugees themselves. Wow. So it actually, there are some internationals who work, of course, but the vast, vast majority of those who work for UNRWA are Palestinians themselves. And even, and I'll come to talk about this in a moment, like those incredibly valiant Palestinians in Gaza right now are those that are getting food and assistance, water, medicine. Those doctors, therapists, psychiatrists who are working with those in need are Palestinians who are risking their own lives to get that care to those internally displaced people in Gaza. And sometimes we've heard so many stories in the last couple of months of somebody losing a family member. A family member's killed. I hate saying losing because they're being killed. And they go to work the next day and keep working because they can't imagine not serving other people in need. There's people whose daughters have given birth, or they've even lost their daughter who was pregnant, and they went to work the next day. And we've heard so many stories about this. That's something very unique about the organization as well. Just the how many Palestinians work for it, and it's also in that way because 30,000 Palestine refugees, it's almost an economy within itself, and that so many people are reliant on that income that UNRWA staff bring. And then also just talking about your experience and your dad's and your mom's, that I have to tell you, I've heard this story so many times of people whose parents have been through UNRWA or they themselves, and I have met the most, I have to be honest, maybe I'm a bit biased, but I have met the most brilliant people who've come out of UNRWA schools, and we get this opportunity in the U.S. to talk to alumni of UNRWA schools, and we have Loïc Bastioni, who really was one of the core engineers who put the first helicopter that flew on Mars. He's a Palestinian refugee from Gaza, went through UNRWA school. I have a dear family that I'm friends with, the Abu Hashims from Gaza. They've been displaced, but four of the sons got to go to educated in the U.S. One of them went to MIT, two of them went to Stanford, one went to Harvard, and then one of them is helping to cure cancer, to develop cancer curing treatments at Memorial Sloan Kettering. One is working at Apple, one has a Rhodes Scholarship right now, and these are brilliant individuals who are contributions to our society, who are bringing amazing things to our country. They are doctors, lawyers, psychiatrists, teachers. They're everywhere in our neighborhood and doing amazing work. And I think it's something so important to reflect on when we think about what's happened in Gaza, that so many of those 15,000 people who've been killed, if they were here in the U.S., those same people, they would be your neighbors. They would be your beloved neighbors. They would be people who would bring you joy, who would meet your children when they're sick, who would teach your children, who would be your architect. And unfortunately, unfortunately, our news and our politicians have all too often dehumanized this population. And this is one of the reasons what's happening is still happening. Sorry, I didn't realize that.
I want to take a moment and appreciate, your heart right now and your emotionality, talking about the people and the opportunities that were provided. Wow, incredible. If those opportunities weren't provided, we wouldn't have had a helicopter on Mars. And
Yes.
Who knows, we maybe wouldn't have had, new cancer treatments. And I love what you said about if those people that we lost, that were killed, were here in the US, they would be your beloved neighbors and productive members of society. And I'm so glad that through you and stories like the ones you shared, we can humanize those people and really remove that stereotypical word that's labeled on everybody, terrorist, and all those horrible dehumanizing terms we've been using. Wow. I'm so blown away, and I'm so, your heart is just so admirable, Mara. Seriously.
Thank you. Watching what has happened since October 7th has been extremely harrowing, and we've had about, I guess the official count for various sources is 14,800 people killed, and 6,000 of those women, 4,000 children, and sometimes those statistics. They try to help people understand these are civilians, but there are so many civilian men, so many fathers who we've seen in social media weep, hold their daughter who's been killed in their arms, and drive ambulances and are doctors. And so that statistic always needs to be qualified, because the men in Gaza who have been taking care of their families and the families around them, and who have not had a break being a surgeon in a hospital, are beautiful people. Yes. And so it has been harrowing. We know that 60% of something close to 60% of the housing units in Gaza have been destroyed. And of course, the vast majority of that destruction is north of Wadi Gaza, in the north of Gaza. But unfortunately, no place is safe in Gaza. And so there have been many people killed in the south, many buildings destroyed, including UNRWA buildings. And if I have the latest information, there's been some 104, over 100 incidences, whether they're missiles or bombs or artillery, that have hit UNRWA UN buildings. And we know that 30 of those have been direct hits. And I think it's very important to those listening to understand that any hit of a United Nations building is a violation of international humanitarian law. We have never seen this number of UN buildings impacted in a war setting, and never have this many UN workers, people who work at the UN, been killed. It's now 109 of our colleagues at UNRWA have been killed. The situation, the humanitarian situation, is deplorable. It's something that the head of the Undersecretary for United Nations Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, said is the worst humanitarian catastrophe he's ever witnessed. And he's worked in Yemen and in Syria and in Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge, and he's never seen anything like this in terms of the devastation. We have over 1 million people in UNRWA shelters. These shelters are schools that used to teach used to serve 300,000 students. No student has been in school since October 9th. And now, instead of school children, we have whole families who've been displaced and living a very, very difficult, I don't know if you can call this life. They're surviving, in conditions that we can't even imagine. Some of the families have worn the same clothes for 45 days. They are in lines of 200 to 400 for a bathroom. 4,000 people on average have access to a shower. That's if there's water. And up until a couple of days ago, until this humanitarian pause, we had run out of clean water for the vast majority of the population. It is just simply unimaginable from us in our setting here to fathom what life would be like. UNRWA is the only organization with the breadth and depth to be able to address the vast majority of the needs of this displaced population. And certainly we work hand in hand with many other organizations, so I can be happy to talk about. But in terms of the logistics, logistical footprint, UNRWA is the one kind of getting those goods and services to those in need.
I'm so sorry for your loss as a human being and as a member of UNRWA, and really like talking about crippling the institution and how much loss of opportunity now we're seeing, like these schools that have been hit, these are places of opportunity that, were like for my dad and for the people you mentioned. And who knows when those schools are going to be rebuilt, who knows when those children are going to be back in a place where they can harness that opportunity. Probably for a long time, we're going to see loss as a reverberating effect of all of this, even when hopefully there's a ceasefire very soon. And, as you're talking, I was wondering, and, this might be a little bit of a political question. And I will start by saying, like, the term human shields is extremely offensive to me. It's extremely insensitive. We cannot use that term as a justification to kill, just like we wouldn't bomb a whole school in the US if a terrorist was inside. That logic, that human aspect of not being okay with killing should apply across the board. It doesn't matter. But for you, how do you feel about the argument that, terrorists are hiding in schools, there are bits in these schools, etc., as a justification to bomb the schools? Would you be comfortable commenting on that?
Well, I can tell you, I have never met anybody from Hamas. And I can tell you that when I went to UNRWA schools in Gaza, they were filled with children and teachers. I have no, experience in seeing anything like that. So I had no particular, observation of my own experience to answer that question. All I could say is, like you said, if, let's say, Hamas were hiding in Israel, would you bomb an Israeli schools? They went and would you bomb a whole school system? Would you bomb half of the country? If 9/11 happened and some people who were going to get on some planes ended up, going around the U.S. in different urban settings, would you bomb Los Angeles? Would you bomb New York? Would you flatten half of the residential buildings and kill tens of thousands of individuals? From a personal perspective now, let me take my UNRWA hat off. As a person, violence begets violence. And if we want to think about the way out of this situation, there's got to be more creative thinkers. Yeah. So, that's what I can say. I have seen nothing of this personally, no human shields personally. And I can also tell you that I went to Gaza the summer before last, and I think one of the hardest things for me and those who've been able to travel there is how different Gaza is portrayed by people who've never been there versus those who've seen it with our own eyes. And
yes, please tell us more about that.
Just as hard as that existence is, being 16 years, let me just set the stage for a second, even before October 7th, 16 years of a brutal blockade of air, sea, and land. And what that means for those who don't know, because people say, oh, Israel left Gaza, it's been free. No, okay, Israel left, but they control all the borders in and out. And what that means in practice is that Israel allows or disallows certain medicines, whatever food comes in, whatever goods are sold on the shelves. Israel has approval or can disapprove the import of those into Gaza. Israel controls the borders for goods and people. If your child needs cancer treatment, that wasn't available in Gaza pre-October 7th. Of course, now hospitals have been destroyed in Gaza, so there's very little available. But say they needed cancer treatment and they needed to go to outside of Gaza, Israel could say no, and Had says no. You cannot leave Gaza without the permission of Israel, or if you go through Egypt, through the Rafah crossing, you would have to pay thousands of dollars per person to leave safely. And I know of many such situations. Even within those constraints, and then you take 7, or depending on how you count, 6 or 7 military incursions, assaults. A 16-year-old, imagine a 16-year-old in Gaza has been through 6 military incursions, has suffered 6 times a military incursion. If they're alive today. And that trauma, and yet, almost in spite of those difficulties, Gazans refuse to live in sadness or despair. And you see the joy, you see the family joy, you see kids and parents walking along the corniche, buying little silly, toys in the kiosks. And then you see what again just blows my mind in comparison to what people think. you see in UNRWA schools the most brilliant, high-achieving kids who know that education is one of their only ways to, if they can succeed, whether in Gaza or if they get a small infinitesimal chance to get out, education is that key. And no offense to the beautiful, amazing young men I met, but the women were superstars. The women I met in Gaza were powerful. They were articulate. They all want to be coders, by the way, now. They all wanted to be in the digital economy.
Wow.
And I love this, that the most marriageable young women in Gaza were those with the highest Thanawiyama, those who graduated the highest on their baccalaureate in their high school.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
And to think of what people here in the States think of the Gaza Strip. And so you saw these women and these families and these men too who education has been so important to these families. And whatever I love this weird word, but you see these comments, Hamas wouldn't let, or the stay in Gaza where women are. No, I saw women treated. I saw these, amazing women and families supporting these amazing female doctors and teachers and lawyers and coders and entrepreneurs. And so I think that's the tragedy which almost hits the most for me is their future has been robbed, and the future was bright. It was bright.
Wow, what a glimpse and beautiful insight you gave us there into Gaza. I never knew any of this. So thank you so much for sharing that. And, I love the emphasis that you made on women, because so often the argument is that women are second-class citizens, or they're almost like, slaves to men in that world. And it sounds like, on the contrary, women are glorified and they're matriarchal in society. And, there's even a desirability of women being successful in order to want to run after them and marry them. And that is absolutely beautiful to hear. And the resilience, the resilience piece is in the Arab world in general, and especially for Palestinians, it taught me so much, especially coming here as a doctor and emphasizing, mental health and lifestyle change and focusing on stress, just being a product of that resilience it's so important. It can teach us so much. And listening to people's stories that come from there, and your stories, being so connected to there, it's really so inspiring on so many levels. Thank you so much for giving us that insight into Gaza. What about your experience with Israelis?
Yeah, so my grandmother actually took me when I was a young woman. We were supposed to go to China, and I was the only grandchild who was female, so she decided to take me, just in case my cousins are listening. Sorry, but we're all boys. She took me, and then the Tiananmen Square massacre happened, and so she said, okay, we'll go to Eastern Europe, which we went to just before the Berlin Wall fell, and it was still the Soviet Union, which was fascinating. And we went to Israel on the way, and so I visited just briefly at that time. And then I've known, of course, Israelis throughout my life. What I will say is that there are some very amazing Israelis who, especially in this moment, who are standing up for what they believe in the face of a very, strong political will to have them not be heard. And I've known a number of Israelis throughout my life who have seen things very much the way that I've described here, and have been brave, and certain journalists who are amazing, who've been brave to say what they've seen. And I think that's also just something that has made this moment that we're all dealing with, in terms of just the devastation in the Middle East, from the taking of the hostages and the killing of 1,200 Israelis to the siege of Gaza and the flattening of half of that strip, and the killing of over 15,000 people. I think that what we've seen is a movement in the U.S. of Jews, Muslims, and Christians, peace-loving individuals who are calling for a ceasefire. And for me as a Jewish person, to not feel as alone as I felt sometimes, and to have Jewish brothers and sisters say that you can't define Israel, what is Jewish, what it means to be Jewish, to me. And to me, being Jewish, being told what Jews should think, and being told that Jews have a uniform ideology, whether from an anti-Semite or from an Israeli, to me is wrong. I should have my own thoughts as an individual And especially as someone whose family has suffered historically in terrible ways, my Jewish values are to have compassion. And for somebody to tell me to squash that compassion, that compassion is not Jewish, I challenge them. And so that to see the actions of Jewish and Muslim and Christian brothers and sisters come together in this moment has been so powerful.
So powerful. I have been so inspired by Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now, and I watched Israelism,
Yes.
all of which so good. So
Yes.
good. Wow. It really, I think it's one of the best films of our time.
Yeah.
And it really like the bonding now that we're seeing between these three different sects, which, the myth is that we hate each other. The myth is that we just want to kill each other, right? But it's actually not true. It's extremism that exists on both sides that pins us against each other. In my mind, the root cause, the root problem of all of this is extremism. Whether it was supremacy of one group over another, or religion being one religion being more important than another. Extremism is at the heart of this, and the more we can break that extremism, break these myths, and connect to that compassion piece, which I love. One of the defining statements of Judaism is B'Tselem Elohim, which is all lives are precious. And to see that modeled by Jews and also modeled by Muslims and Christians and everybody else really is the future. It's hope that we can see this come to an end and there can finally be peace between these two people and in that land. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I do have a question about the claims of anti-Semitism in the UNRWA textbooks for Palestinians. And I've read a report by I think the George Eckert Institute, which analyzed these books and also suggested revisions, which were then also made, but were not made in their entirety because some revisions were considered like an erasure of Palestinian plight and history rather than a true stand against anti-Semitism. Can you comment a little bit about that?
Yeah. Unfortunately, many of the reports and claims against UNRWA are really at their heart trying to delegitimize UNRWA, and by doing so, take away the refugee issue. So we have to understand a lot of these claims in their political context. UNRWA takes very seriously the need to educate with tolerance and an understanding of each other and educate against racism and prejudice. And in fact, just to quote UNRWA here exactly, UNRWA is one of the only in the whole school system in the Middle East region is one of the few organizations that utilizes a curriculum framework that emphasizes UN values, specifically including neutrality, human rights, tolerance, equality, non-discrimination with regard to race, gender, language, and religion. And what happens is UNRWA, like all UN organizations, as the UN practice, is they use the local textbooks. And so UNRWA, it's so funny what we hear in certain claims. UNRWA doesn't have its own textbooks. It uses the textbooks of the host country, which in this case is the Palestinian Authority. Now, UNRWA does an assessment of those books regularly. And in the case where UNRWA finds issues, and let's say in 2021, there were 3% of those materials they looked at had some sort of questionable material. When they find that, they make sure that teachers are aware of it, and teachers teach. They don't teach from that part of the textbook. They teach with supplementary materials which are in line with UN values. And even in this 3%, the majority of the material was related to maps or references to the occupation. I can't not recognize at this moment that Netanyahu went to the UN with a map of what he said was all of Israel, which included occupied territories where millions of Palestinians live. So maps are used, in certain ways by all sorts of actors. And what the reports is, they focus on this small amount in a situation where 18,000 staff members teach 700 schools, some 500,000 children. And they find one or two pieces of objectionable material along those lines that I'm describing, call them out, and say that UNRWA is teaching anti-Semitism. So when UNRWA finds anything objectionable, it is immediately brought to attention. All cases are researched, are investigated, and if there's disciplinary action, it's given. But it is very clear that there's a habit of taking, a couple of things that, like maps that are drawn with certain political ideology in mind as anti-Semitic, and then labeling the whole teaching system as anti-Semitic. And so, despite everything UNRWA does to both say that this is, if we find anything, which is in the 1-2%, if that, we automatically investigate. I shouldn't say we, because we're not implementing on the ground, but UNRWA automatically investigates. And if there is something, there's disciplinary actions taken. But the degree to which these things are politicized, what is a highly effective system, which actually the British Council has awarded the UNRWA schools, 14 schools in the West Bank and 45 schools in Ghana. The British Council has said that these schools were successfully preparing students to be responsible global citizens by embedding international curriculum education into their curriculum, and they were honored out of many different school systems globally. And the World Bank UNHCR said that UNRWA's educational outcomes are among the best in the region and the lowest cost per student. So there's a political bend to all of this, and at heart, it's trying to delegitimize UNRWA and thereby the refugee issue. We take seriously any claim, and we're going to investigate it, but everything we found is, the actual cases are extremely small, and when they are, we disciplinary actions are taken.
Yeah, and it sounds like they're really and they kind of overshadow the bigger picture of how helpful that, even the British Council recognized the outcomes of the beautiful and wonderful outcomes towards people being, responsible global citizens. I love that term. And, I also echo that, in our textbooks in Lebanon and much of the Arab world, we don't talk about gender and, equality and, in terms of race and sexuality and all that stuff. So to have that actually incorporated in those books is huge in that region.
Yes.
And it's wonderful. And I would even argue that, Netanyahu's presentation of that map is anti-Semitic to me, because anything that drives hate towards Jews is anti-Semitic. And so when you present that map in that way and you erase the Palestinian plight, that is going to fuel more hate towards Jews from the Arab world, of course. And, anybody that supports Palestine as a cause, especially people that aren't exposed to Jews and don't understand Jewish culture, thankfully those people are now seeing, the Jewish Voice for Peace and all that's happening to really understand what Judaism is about and differentiate between Judaism and the political ideologies of Israel. So thank you so much for that clarification.
And I would just say, as an individual speaking, I would love to see Israeli textbooks and try to see, how Palestinians are spoken of. And I think that it's naive and disingenuous and cynical to focus in on what's being focused in a highly politicized environment where there are blatant generalizations and not factual statements that are around the environment as a whole. So UNRWA is doing its damnedest, its best job possible to make sure that school is a place of utter tolerance for religion, nationality, ethnicity, and that includes tolerance for Judaism and Jewish people, of course.
Beautiful. And I did read a book called Palestine in Israeli School Books by a Israeli teacher called Nurit Peled Al-Hanan, who she is a profound human being. Unfortunately, she lost her own child to terrorist acts. But she found it within herself to analyze how do we teach extremism to Israeli kids? And just like you said, the maps erase Palestine. Palestinians are portrayed as terrorists. The common word to refer to Palestinians as terrorists. They're also, the cartoons are very dehumanizing. Palestinians look primitive, threatening. And, the list goes on about what's being taught in Israeli school books. And, I will tell you that I've had my fair share of meeting Israelis that are a product of that, state all these parallel facts and believe them so much. And it's so hard to meet them in a compassionate place where we acknowledge the suffering of both people, because that's what's important here, is that we acknowledge that both people have had a suffering in this journey. We can't hold the people that immigrated to Israel when it was created accountable for needing to immigrate and for being there today. We can't do that. We have to acknowledge that on some level, those people are blameless. They were a product of atrocity and ended up there, and now are still a continued product of atrocity. And unfortunately, a lot of what's being taught is extremism also in these school books. And I, like you, would love to see revisions made that are more inclusive, that teach people that we are here together on this land and that we are partners now in this land, not enemies, as is being taught. So thank you so much for that clarification. And on that line, I did see that Israeli politicians like the intelligence minister claim that UNRWA is a failed organization. Is that along the same lines? Is that because of the delegitimization?
It's of cynical attacks that are politically targeted, and the truth just doesn't bear them out. So it's a concerted campaign to delegitimize the primary organization providing for refugees and their descendants until there's a just and durable solution. And that is the standard way in which refugees the world over in many settings where there's not a just and durable solution in the lifetime of those originally refugees, like in 1948. You're of course handling the humanitarian concerns of their children, because there isn't a state yet. There's not a place where Palestinians can have their independence, their self-realization, and control their own country and fates. And so, like I said, unfortunately, UNRWA is necessary. I long for the day when UNRWA is no longer necessary, and we hope that day will come in a situation where every single person of every religion has the ability to live and find joy and prosper. And in the Holy Land, that means Jews, Christians, and Muslims, that we all find a way to have peace and live our lives and have hope and imagine a better world for our children, inshallah. That they will.
Absolutely. It was a reality in the past, and it can totally be a reality in the future, and hopefully today, sooner than later. So what would you ask of people listening to us to help your mission at the UNRWA?
Yeah, well, definitely you can go onto our website for some basic information about how UNRWA was formed and why, and then specifically about the work that UNRWA USA does. We have all sorts of stories of alumni, of survivors of what the Palestinians call the Nakba in 1948, when they were dispossessed and many times forcibly from their homes, and just learn about some of the amazing people who have persevered and who, like I said, the lawyers and doctors and amazing engineers, who many of whom are in the U.S. and have been very successful and have lived very, very good and useful lives here. And then to look beyond the headlines. I, in my life, have been shocked by what I perceived as obvious truth, and then the reality of what confronted me when I had the chance to travel. And anybody who's traveled and has seen, oh my God, this world opened up to me when I visited whatever country it was, because I thought people were like this, or I thought poverty would look like this, or I thought. And then you're just blown away by what you see in reality. That is probably so even more true in the Middle East, because the region has been so politicized and so fought over, and ideology is so much a part of that. So I say, go see for yourself. Anyone who's seen the wall firsthand, who's seen the Israeli side and the Palestinian side of this wall, who has seen the roads bifurcating, Bantustanization of the West Bank, who's seen the roads that Palestinians can walk on, the Israelis can walk on and the Palestinians can't, who's seen the general state of development on either side, your world will be changed in terms of how you speak about it. And I hope you believe it, because it comes from me and your colleagues and all the Palestinians you know. But if you don't, go visit and see. And I just say, as my dad said, with all due respect to our elders, a good dose of questioning authority is good for all of us. Yes. And I guess my kids the same, to my detriment.
I'm so grateful for you teaching them that, even though you know the cost of that. And that's only been very profound to produce humans like you in the work that you're doing. And I love your emphasis on, stories of people, like get to know the people. The people are not the governments. The people are not the politics. Like there's so much to be said about the people. So thank you for saying that. And can we donate to UNRWA?
Yes, of course.
That's helpful?
There's so many generous Americans, and actually there's been a couple of folks around the world who've donated to us as well. But we, primarily our supporters are from the U.S. And actually, anytime I feel bad about people not understanding the region, I look at, so we've had some 30,000 new donors since October 7th. And we're talking grassroots. And with all the grassroots support, so we're not talking the wealthiest. These are people like you and me who are not, billionaires,
Yes.
who are making their life through honest living and hard work, and they are donating from those hard-earned funds. And so we've been able to send $12.8 million to UNRWA because of that generosity. And we're feeding people, we're providing people with clean water, with tents, with hygiene kits, supporting the delivery of medical support services for 500,000 people, providing trauma relief services for hundreds of thousands. And that's all possible because of the generosity of Americans. And then finally, I would say we have a call to action on our website, which is right now a letter to Secretary of State Antony Blinken to call for an immediate ceasefire. And so we've had so many letters sent. And then we welcome everybody to join us on Wednesday evening on November 29th. We're going to have a vigil honoring all those in Gaza, including my dear colleague Hani Al-Matkoun and his brother and his brother's wife and their 4 children who were killed, and I'm calling for a ceasefire. So we welcome anybody to go to our website. You can register to join us, and we're going to have some amazing music and poetry from some folks you may have heard of. So we look forward to as many people joining as possible.
Beautiful, and I will definitely be there. Thank you for holding an event like that, and sorry about your colleague Hani. That's really, really sad. So unfortunately, our time together is coming to an end. Mara, wow, I am so blown away by everything you shared. Would you happen to have a notable post, poem, or piece of writing that helped you navigate the conflict? Or maybe a stress management practice that you've been using that helps you do all the awesome work you've been doing?
Yeah, it's tough. I'll tell you, all of us who are working on this issue are feeling it, and are feeling it in our bones. As I was saying just before we started, and so some things that I need to do, I realize, is that I can get out of my body. And there's a book, maybe I'm sure you're aware as a psychiatrist, but Your Body Keeps the Score. And
Yes, I love that book.
I always think about that. So one of the things I do is try to just get in touch with my physical nature by walking, by exercising, by actually just like make sure that I can still feel, my muscles. And so I think that's really important. And then, whereas before this cooking might have been a chore, like I've got all these things, but now actually cooking for the family, and it just takes me out of sitting on the computer and constantly, seeing the latest news, yes, doom scrolling it. And then I physically remove my phone from anywhere close to our bedroom, and that is the only way I get a good night's sleep. So I recommend that highly. We're just too wed to this constant information, and there's no way you can find peace with that bombardment, especially when the news is so terrible.
Yes, and it's really for us that have skin in this issue, and just are people who feel for everybody. It's so hard to peel ourselves away, that survival skill, but we have to check our own pulse before we can show up better for others, especially now, especially if we're advocating, especially if we're doing this work. So thank you so much for sharing about your mindfulness practice. I'm huge into mindfulness, and about your community practice, pouring yourself into your children, enjoying the small tender moments that you have, the blessings, the joys that we can anchor to while we show up for this very profound cause. And I'm going to share a post from your profile, actually, from your Instagram. So Mara has an Instagram. I highly recommend everybody to follow her. It's been super insightful. And one of your posts is from Hannah Arendt, who is one of the most influential political philosophers of the 20th century. She was also a German Jewish person who was forced to leave Germany in 1993. And she says, "The death of human empathy is one of the earliest and most telling signs of a culture about to fall into barbarism. Why did you share that post?
Yeah, I mean, because empathy is everything to me, and it's understanding, not only focusing on ourselves, that to be human is to be living and engage with other people, and I live actually by this Talmudic saying, which my dad would say to me, which is, if I'm for myself alone, who am I? And that has been the driving philosophy. I have to be for myself, of course. I can't be only for other people. And the saying goes on to say that. But if I'm only for myself, then I'm nothing in this world. We live in community with other people. We find joy with other people. And so empathy and understanding somebody else is central to that. It's a driving force in my life.
So beautiful. And there I learned something also beautiful, new, that's Jewish. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And with that, I want to just end with a little prayer. And before I do that, I just want to thank you again for being here. This was such an insightful and profound conversation with a lot of joy and a lot of also depth and heartache. So thank you for joining us.
Doing this great podcast. It's such an important thing for people to start to really think about. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. So the prayer is, may all beings everywhere thrive in peace and dignity and share in all our joys. And may we see true peace in the Middle East for all in our lifetime.
Amen. Thank you.